Hey, everybody. Happy summer. Welcome back to another edition of the 20-minute podcast. And again, just thought we'd pop in and talk to you a little bit. Very happy to bring in a guest, someone that I've had the pleasure of knowing for probably way too long.
At this point, yeah. We've been around each other on the sidelines of games for at least 25 years or so. Is that right? 20 to 25 years, somewhere in there.
By the way, that is Matt Rodewald, TV extraordinaire, media extraordinaire, taking time out of his busy summer to join us here. And this all kind of began, Matt, with a post on my free message board, people talking about IHSA. And yeah, I think you actually started with IHSA TV ideas. And first of all, very brave of you to come on. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Second of all, as you all know, sometimes, and we see this like right after the state final games, people are not shy about expressing their thoughts and opinions on the coverage, whether good, bad, or indifferent. And for those fans that are out there that do that, I can tell you that all gets looked at, and more gets looked at by more than just Mr. Rodewald. There are several others that take that input seriously and listen to your thoughts and suggestions seriously. And, you know, whether you're a crackpot or you're not a crackpot, they're definitely going to look at it. And knowing a lot of the guys that I know that are involved in those productions, they're going to take it to heart and try to improve what they're doing, which they would do, what you guys would do anyway.
Right.
But still, I think it's really grassroots kind of feedback that sometimes maybe you guys don't get as much as you'd like. Is that fair?
Right. I think that's a good way to do it. And just for those, watching and listening, I certainly appreciate the feedback. We don't get better without feedback,
right.
No matter what. And because we want to tailor the product as best we can to not just a specific audience, because, let's take a step back. You watch the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl is catered to football fans, but there are 100 million people watching. They can't just go straight football. It has to be a little more generic sometimes. So there are people with that philosophy in mind on a much smaller scale. We can't go like all in on hardcore. We kind of have to kind of paint the storylines a little bit. So there's some stuff that kind of, for a lot of people, is repetitive, or the first time they've watched it, it has to be able to balance both of it. But, I think that, just on the overall, I think where we are from a production standpoint is one of the best spots we've been in a long time, because there's an anxious feeling of how do we get this better? And we're all starving for live sports. I don't care what network you are. If you have a media outlet, you're starving for live sports content because you can sell advertising for it, whatever it is. IHSA has a different viewpoint than, say, Weigel Broadcasting in the way the state finals go. So those are the kinds of two things that I tried to break apart a little bit.
Yeah, and you mentioned productions, and I can tell you firsthand, I've been involved for a long time. It sounds like I might be involved down the road here a little bit with some more on the TV side, which I love. It's a blast. Everyone involved, no one's there collecting a check. Everyone there, because first of all, it's not that great of a check to collect. Let's be honest. Everyone there wants to be there, and everyone there, from camera people to production people. And by the way, I mean, what the general fans need to understand is, as I mentioned, it's a check. It's fine. People have no idea how much effort and work goes into those productions. I'm just thinking the camera people alone.
Yeah.
2 12-hour plus days out in the elements. I mean, Matt, we've seen every type of weather imaginable in late November for a state title game.
Well,
it's a grind.
And let me go back to, I think it was it 2019 or maybe 2018 when at Northern, when the cameras got messed up. I was not a part of that telecast. I was in Arizona, but watching it and then reading the comments, I'm like, guys, they can't fix that. Like, it's just it's the equipment they have. They can't, and honestly, that's a decision made long before the broadcast and telecast itself. So you can place blame where you want, but it's not that, that 24-year-old photographer who's been doing it a couple of years knows how to fix it. That he does. He can't, and that's the thing. Those guys are working, our call time is at 8:00. and you gotta lay down all that cable. You gotta lay down the equipment. You gotta test, make sure it's good to go. Oh yeah, and there's a Thanksgiving holiday, so there's some people around there that are not around their family.
And
I know.
You
I
don't
have it
know
easy.
and you don't know who's playing until like 4 days before that.
You don't know who's playing till Saturday. And then you're going, okay, I got to build all these graphics for 16 teams.
Yep.
That's 16 logos, 16 color schemes. And I get in the weeds a little bit with the director a lot. And I think the folks of the IHSA appreciate it. At least they've told me that. But it's the idea that I want to take off LaGrange Nazareth and just say Nazareth. I work hard to do that. Right. I also want that color to match as close as possible because I know it bothers people. And it bothers me. But I understand if you're an alum and you're watching that, you're going, come on, this isn't that hard. It isn't, but the volume that they're trying to scramble to get it together is not easy. And they don't save the stuff from last year. It's not like that. That's not how that works.
Right.
They have a graphics package, but they're all templates and they got to start over almost from scratch every time. So there are a lot of production folks that are behind the scenes that are working 8 a.m. until at least 11 o'clock, turn around, do it again. And that's why Saturdays sometimes you start to see things bleed into the show. You're like, oh, what's this replay? Why is that graphic up? And you see it Friday morning, and I have seen it in every telecast. I've always been the first one. See, I always get to be in the first broadcast, whether it's like the 1A semifinal in girls basketball or the 1A football final. Guess what I get? I get the bugs where I get and when I was younger, I was a little more impatient. Now that I've been doing it as long as I have, I go, okay, I got to help people get through this here because otherwise it turns people off, in the politics of a broadcast. To be honest with you, you don't want to be a pain in the butt broadcaster because guess what? You're not going to be a broadcaster anymore. Yeah. So those are little things I try and help them along, but they're just going to come with the territory. And I thought this past year, the folks at Weigel did a great job of trying to minimize that. And I saw some wide eyes in football once they got into the second half of that second game to go, oh my God, we got 6 more to go. This is intense. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm hearing it in my ears too. I'm like, guys, saddle up. It's a long day and just take a deep breath and take some breaks. When we have a halftime, get off that board, get out of that truck. They're in a little truck, guys, for almost 24 hours in a 48-hour stretch. That just does something to your head. Yeah. And I at least am in a booth where I get open air and I get to see things. But for some of those guys, they're there a long time.
All right, so before we start going down the rabbit hole, which I know we're going to anyway, it's just a matter of time. But so I figured we attack this 2 ways. Number one, let's talk state finals and state final coverage because that obviously always gets a lot of feedback. But then the other part of this as well is the streaming side of it with NFHS and how that has transpired and gone down. And there's a lot of misconceptions and things that I think people don't realize on that end of it as well. Again, another popular punching bag once week 1 begins all the way through the rest of the year. So let's start with state finals. And again, I know there was a lot of feedback on this post, so I'm going to try to go through some of it. And again, it's, people are talking about, again, personalities and people that are doing the game. And
let's go there first.
And I'm going to start because I pretty much know everyone that's involved in this stuff. And like you, I've known for years. Dave Bernhardt, I've known forever. I mean, Jesus, he gave me the EDGYTIM moniker. So we'll blame him for that.
That's right.
His wife is still trying to sue me for royalties. But, people have comments and thoughts whether they like someone or they don't like someone. And I guess that's okay. I'll admit I was probably one of those more critical people years ago. As you mentioned, once you really get involved and work with it and learn and see what's involved and how much work is involved, you soften your take a little bit. You understand how much work is involved. And, there are some lightning rod personalities that are involved. People that I've gotten to know over the years. And as a general rule of thumb, I will say this and I'll stick to it. These people are not doing it for their health or for their ego. They're doing it because they want to be there. And I think they do put the work in. And it's a tremendous amount of work to put in, as you mentioned, for 4 games each for 2 days and 8 games total. very short window to prepare. Can they always be better? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they can.
And
well,
it's
let me
watched,
start. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's watched pretty closely, and there have been changes. There have been personnel changes. You're back. That was I think a positive personnel change to come back. But they are looked at, and the people that put these productions together, they look at personnel and they kind of grade them, and you will see changes from time to time. So, again, don't want to get into rock throwing with anyone, because I don't think anyone deserves that, to be honest. But I think people, again, just need to have a little bit more of an understanding of what goes behind it, and understand that whether you like it or not, they're trying to do the best job they can.
Right. And I'll just say, with I work with Jack McInerney this year. It's the first time I've worked in a play-by-play color role with him. I've done sideline for his games for years, but I've never had to kind of lead him, lead the horse to water, so to speak, on certain points. So we were worried about that. We certainly talked about that at length, many times. The biggest thing I can do from a preparation standpoint is almost get out of his way while he looks at tape, talks to coaches, talks to players, talks to other teams, gets to know the teams. When you're doing 1A and 2A, they love to throw everything at you. Those teams, those schools, they want to help. This is their profile, especially a private school at like class 2A level. That's a huge enrollment. That's free advertising for them for 3 hours. So we know that. So they want to help. It's not that. It's just a matter of volume sometimes. Yep. And so sometimes when you ask a guy like, and I'm not, and again, I'm just putting an example out there. When you ask a guy like Jack McInerney, hey, I need you to prepare schemes on 8 teams, 16 sides of the ball, and maybe a special teams nugget. I need you to know all the ins and outs. It's just not going to happen. And so that goes with anyone, whether it's Boomer, whether it's Mark Lindo. It's just not going to happen. We follow all year as best we can. And I do the same thing. And I coach football for a season, right? So I understand some of the ins and outs of what it takes from a coach standpoint, game plan, game prep. It helps my questioning now when I'm talking to these coaches to say, okay, what am I looking for? And it allows me to kind of lead to people, whether it's Casey Stanaher on the sidelines or, anybody we else have and anyone else we have. For me, preparing on a sideline standpoint, I always want to do a little more scheme aspect too, so that I can have that question ready going into halftime. What worked in the first half? Yep. Well, when they say, well, our run game's really good, and we heard that pregame or like Monday when we do our coaches teleconferences, okay, well, they're doing what they want. And then the color, I can bounce that off the analyst. The analyst can hear that and go, okay, well, they're doing it. And you can see it with what he's seeing, and then mirror it with the actual voice of the head coach going into the break. That's vital information on how this telecast could work. But there's only so much tape. And from a play-by-play standpoint, I got to be able to mix in not only tape, but, storylines, profiles, featurey type stuff, and then set up our sideline for whatever featurey situation. So we do these teleconferences with the coaches. We get, I want to say 30 minutes. You've been on those calls. Yeah. And it used to be 30 minutes for just, the announcers. And then they would have a media call after. That's a lot. So they finally combined it down. At first I resisted it, but now I get it. So it's one of those things where it's like, we just got to get them going. And there's no good way to do this. So we do it Monday, and it's basically 8 to noon. And there's only so many questions we can remember to get to with all that time. Yep. Yes, we can do follow-ups, but by this point, they're knee-deep in prep. They don't have a whole lot of time for us. We kind of have the mercy of the whole process here. And as you mentioned, like it or not, Thursday's Thanksgiving. You're not going to be calling guys up unless you absolutely have to. No, absolutely not. On Thanksgiving, and Friday the game starts. So you have a very, very short window to prep. Right. One thing I wanted to bring up, Matt, and I've seen this. I saw this last year, and in small school, people love bringing this up, and I guess there's some merit to it, but I just think it would never work. People talk about small school radio and the guys that have covered those teams for 30, 40 years, and why don't you have them come up and cover it? And, first of all, logistically, it makes 0 sense, number one. Number two, I could tell you as a guy that does radio and has done radio and television, and you have done radio and television. By the way, I used to listen to Rodey on the Score all the time. I wish you were still on, dude. Honestly, I used to listen on your weekend show.
It's like having a gigantic 10-foot billboard to paint on versus a square about this big is the difference between radio and television.
Yeah.
It is very hard to pull off what you pull off on radio, on TV, because of the restrictions. You have people in your ear. You have all these different packages, as you mentioned. Oh, yeah, don't be late for the commercial break. We need to do this. We need to do that. I think it's a lot different than people realize as a broadcaster to do. Now, give it a try. Sure,
Well,
why not? But
when you're doing radio, you don't have anybody in your ear.
no,
Like, it's just you guys. And then you can kind of determine going to break, what have you. And the other aspect of when you're doing radio, and there's a local guy I listen to, and I get frustrated because I'm like, I want more description of what I'm hearing, because I just can't hear enough of it. You go take that to football on television is almost too much. I catch myself doing formation radio style, and I have to kind of pull back a bit, because guess what? You can see it. I don't need to tell you exactly. You can kind of see the formation more often than not. We don't have all the bells and whistles like the 1st and 10 marker or the first down marker or anything, or like the ability to put the downs and distance on the screen, or basically point out a player. He's up top. Like, I would love that. We ain't gonna get those. But
no.
It's the radio guys, they do great things. But I'll tell you this, and this is not to offend my friend Tim here. Tim loves putting on a suit, right? EDGYTIM loves putting on a suit.
No,
I think our radio friends, that's something they don't want to do either. Like, the idea of dressing up and being in front of the camera for the 30 seconds that you really are, it's not easy. That's not the fun part. The fun part is actually the telecast, and they would just rather forego all that. So, and the other thing is that, and I talked about this too in the post, is that you want that singular voice. You want and this is not to elevate me, but when I was a kid, there was something about hearing Kenny McReynolds down doing the state championship games, hearing Dan Roan or Joe Passion. That's a name you haven't heard in a while. Having Dave Bernhardt call your state championship game is something that it's a big deal to a lot of people in certain communities, and that's something coaches use as a motivating tool. Hey, we're going to go out and win this game because guess what? Dave Bernhardt is going to be calling your name on Thanksgiving weekend. Yeah. Break the huddle, and here we go through the tunnel. Like, there's an element to that still exists, and that's something that unifies our telecasts across the board. That's part of the aspect of you're on the big stage. So we're trying to create that big stage element. And I will tell you, the production staff from Steve Farber to Chris Jackson, even Fred Weintraub, who I had a conversation with this week from a game of the week standpoint over WCIU, we've all talked about how do we make sure that these are college type telecasts and not just, your local access channel. That is important to us. And that's been important to the IHSA. And ratings usually come with that if you have it on the right side. So, from a production standpoint is one thing. From a broadcaster standpoint, it also carries together that same weight.
Can you talk a little bit and get into the economics of state final championship weeks? And, I've tried to express to people for a long time now that, look, this isn't a huge money maker. WCIU is not rolling away with truckfuls of cash from this event, from covering 2 days of this. And we talk about production cost, and people mention all the time how you'll see a rerun of this or an infomercial of that versus a production. Well, there's reasons for that, and why you continue to see that type of programming versus local programming. So discuss the economics,
right?
Plus good, positive, negative of broadcasting a weekend of the state finals.
Well, let me go with NFHS for a second, because everyone loves to say, why do I got to pay for this? This should be free. No, if you're paying for Netflix, you're paying for content
and everything else.
If you're paying for a gate admission to a football game of $8, guess what? The convenience of you not having to go out in that weather is you paying the $10 or $12 or whatever it is. I'm currently paying on auto subscription, and I forget to turn off in the summer. Yeah, but you're paying for that content, and when you think about it, you're paying for everything with one admission fee. Right. So on that semifinal Saturday, you know what I get to do? I get to fly around to all the games whenever I want. So, that's the burden that we're all dealing with in some sense. But, to answer your question, the IHSA's, and without speaking too much for them, but the basic philosophy I've garnered over the years is that, like basketball, regional finals, sectional semifinals, sectional finals, that really drives the revenue stream they have to keep afloat.
Yes.
Like if you recall during the pandemic, a lot of folks might remember this, they started asking for a membership fee from schools and essentially apologized for doing so, but said, hey, we don't know when sports are going to be back. We're going to ask you for a $125 annual fee for a little while. And I believe it's already gone. Like they did it 2 years just to kind of keep them afloat, and then off they go, because they rely so much on that state tournament revenue at the lower levels. State finals, you're just not going to get it. Why? Because you got to rent those big venues. You got to rent, the University of Illinois, and then you see what it looks like at the University of Illinois for the state finals. You hear it and you feel it, and it certainly feels different than at Northern Illinois, which it will feel differently at Illinois State, but it's also a cost difference. So those are things that they got to start with. From a production standpoint, I would say that Weigel has a production crew of about 10 to 12 guys total, maybe 2 or 3 of them really in those voices in the truck, whether it's the director, the graphics person, someone talking to master control, and then you have people back in the studio. Again, the studio element, and you're going to probably see that instead of on site this year, probably back in Chicago in a more traditional studio element this year. That's going to add more crew, another 2 to 4 people at least. So you got to pay them. Some of them are Weigel employees that they can be on their typical shift. But for someone like me, I'm a stringer. And a lot of the photographers and a lot of the grips, anyone working on the sideline with that sound dish. And yeah, I've seen those at the high school level, not too often, but CN100 had those for years. Those people, they get paid, and it may not be a ton, but it adds up. And there's a reason why it's a young person's game. One of my favorite statisticians of all time, Nick Pinto. He is just fabulous. He's usually the guy sitting next to me, and he's in my ear with things that like he's beating me to in like a half second, whether it's basketball or football. He's getting paid. He's the kind of guy who works for Big Ten Network. He's worked for Jim Nance's crew. Like he's been, and he loves this stuff because it's volume to him, and he's getting paid by the game. So am I. But, it's ultimately, you have to be careful with how much those expenses go, because the viewership coming back in does not justify the amount kind of being paid there.
Right.
You're essentially trying to break even or get as close to it as possible.
Yep.
It's Thanksgiving weekend. On that Friday of Thanksgiving weekend, there's not a whole lot on TV, which is why it's a good thing to have a 10 a.m. football game. That's why I want the 10 a.m. football game. I know I don't compete against anybody for an hour, but now you'll have the NFL, Amazon, 3 o'clock game.
Yep.
That's going to be I believe it's going to be the Jets this year. They've already built in that storyline. That's something we have to compete against, and there's an element to linear TV where back in the day, say 10 years ago, you may have said, oh, I forgot that was on. State championships are on right now. You really forget it's on now.
Yeah.
Like you're competing with everything. And yeah, there's no Black Friday shopping like out and about the way it used to be, but people are trying to keep their kids entertained, and you got high school basketball tournaments going on at the same time.
And you still have family in for the weekend. You have everyone's got different things going on.
Or you may be out of town yourself. So there's a lot of elements at play that don't really shake out in terms of ratings the way you want it to. But ultimately, and this is, this is something, this is a format we've stuck with for 45 years now, this basic Friday, Saturday. Other states do it a little differently. Other states have different weather elements that help them, hurt them, what have you. I mean, Indiana has the exact same format, essentially, but they do it inside, which they also get a higher attendance because the games are inside. That's something, which is why I hint at Arlington Heights. Think about that, about how that could change the way that this thing could be done.
I do.
So,
I think about it.
Oh, they have. I know they have in normal. Folks at the headquarters, they're just kind of biding their time, figuring out. So those are kind of the elements in play that kind of add to it. And I hope that kind of answers the economic equation a little bit.
Yeah, I think it does. And I know in that thread, some people brought up other sports. Well, what about baseball? What about wrestling? Why aren't those on? And again, Matt, I'll refer back to just the fact that you're talking cost and you're talking availability and putting these things over the air, it's a lot more involved than I think people realize.
Yeah, and I think that this sounds negative, the way we've discussed it, but in the recent years, I would say in the last 6 months, maybe the last 12 months, there's more of a positive feel about getting some of these things back on traditional television, or at least, whether it's NFHS, to find a way over the air to something you already pay for, aka I pay for Xfinity Stream. So it's not free to me. It may feel free, but it's not. I'm just paying for it amongst the packages I'm already paying for. And having it over the air on television with antennas. That's why it's with Weigel, because it at least allows that option for that station in St. Louis, or that station in Rockford or Champaign, to have it on. So, those are things that you have to keep in mind. But baseball, again, it's a 2 full day event. You're not just getting the state championships on. You're getting the semis and the championships. You're getting both. So how do you do that? That's not exactly easy to do from a crew standpoint. And that's why the NFHS setup is the way it is. And I'll be happy to break that down as well.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into the streaming side of it and NFHS, which again covers baseball and softball and all the other sports. And I know I think you've done some of those. I know Dave Bernhardt's done some of those.
Dave has done baseball for years with Mark Lindo, and that's something they love to do. They don't, Dave Bernhardt was a baseball coach forever. Mark Lindo's coached everything. I've done volleyball, boys volleyball. Didn't play any boys volleyball whatsoever, but I love that tournament. It's my favorite state tournament above football and basketball, because it's the only single class state tournament left. It's just awesome.
So, so let's go down the NFHS road.
Sure.
And I guess I want to start. When the first conception of this came into play. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, wow, look at this. They're going to have all these games on live, and whether, I don't know if you would say it wasn't handled correctly or wasn't really handled. Some of the productions were horrible, and people complained. A lot of connection problems, buffering problems, what have you, various problems throughout this. And I think they got off to a rough start. And I think that I don't think there was enough understanding of what the different roles are in those productions from whoever's doing the on-site, whether it's NFHS actually having people doing it themselves, or if they're getting a feed from a school. As I mentioned, ton of complaints. People would contact, would eventually either get refunded or something. They do something to try to make it better. I think it has gotten better in some ways. I mean, I still go out, as you mentioned, I still have a renewing subscription. I'll go out and check something out every once in a while. If I'm in between games on my phone, I'll pop in. I think I watched you broadcasting, talking to yourself at Lincoln Way East against Glenbard West. I was sitting in a parking lot.
That was it. Yep.
Listening to you doing video and audio, and basically you were one-man production, if I wasn't mistaken in that.
No, you are, and I'll explain that to you, actually, because there is a crew. Now, this is probably the important aspect of this, okay? And I want to go through two scenarios, because I had Glenbard West, Maine South the week before, and we had problems. We had internet problems. I want you to imagine just a regular internet hotspot type setup. And then I want you to imagine 4,000 people on their phones checking Twitter for other scores. That's the problem. That's the problem they haven't gotten around yet. And that's just this is why when I did broadcasts in college back in the 90s, I had a bag phone, like the old bag phone to plug in.
Yep.
But again, it was either that or call the phone company, have them come install a line 2 days before, and then have them uninstall the line 2 days later. And that costs $1 gazillion.
Yep.
It was just a nightmare. So I learned that 25 years ago, like, this is the best way. Hope to God it works, but it's the best way to make it work. And so that's essentially the birth of that technology. The problem they have is now that we have stronger internet signals, or like hardwire or Wi-Fi or what have you, they haven't figured out the NFHS has not figured out a way to kind of like lock in a specific Wi-Fi at each school
Yep.
for them.
Yep.
And that would be something that would help their costs a lot if they did that.
Yeah.
It could charge the schools the extra $10 to hardwire it in. And if they didn't do it, well, they're at the risk of running what we ran into. And then the blame kind of turns onto the school. That's just a business model idea. But so at both of those games, I had I was the only announcer, right? I had a graphics person that kind of made sure the connection worked. Now the graphics package is limited, but I would sit there at least an hour and a half beforehand trying to work to build those things in as best I could. Again, you're talking about a college student or recent college grad, more often than not, that's either not from around here or not very involved in athletics. And so you're just kind of telling them, hey, it's not Glen Ellen, Glenbard West, it's Glenbard West. It's not Park Ridge, Maine South.
Midlothian, Bremen. Yeah.
You're really kind of doing that on your own. The other aspect I think is fascinating, and I think people need to understand, is that the camera, like I'm in the press box, the camera is on top of the press box more often than not, and not in the press box with me. We're not on a system. They can't hear me up there. So if I tell them to show, they have no idea. Yeah. Like they're just showing what they can. And sometimes if I get a good pair of people, what I can ultimately do is have them text each other. And that's about as good as I can get. I'll be honest with you. We're talking barely into the 3 figures in terms of my compensation on a game like that. So it's not that much money. So if I'm getting that much, what do you think they're getting?
The other guy.
So you have to keep that in mind. Now, why does that matter? Because, when they get those subscribers to come in, I've been able to get a look at some of the streaming numbers at times. They're in the thousands. And so when they get those subscriptions that come in, that also makes them money. It may not be a ton of money, but think about, the tens of or hundreds of thousands of schools around the country that are doing this. I was watching games when I was in Arizona. My family's from Indiana. I will watch games over there on a different site because NFHS is not over there. But the NFHS network also they handle a lot of state championship broadcasts nationally, that are not over the air. Right. So they're used to this sort of model and setup, and it's worked for them in a lot of spots. So to them, it's a success. And, I certainly would love to see a few things change, but I don't have any sort of dreams of having a partner or anything like that, or even a statistician. I know exactly what I'm getting myself into with an NFHS broadcast, and I'm just hopeful that the signal holds on. And more often than not, I've never had a huge problem with it. But when people do have problems with it, they've got to understand that it's not me. It's not even the kid working. Because when we do have problems, I'll tell you, at the Maine South game, that kid was on the phone for 20 minutes scrambling back at his headquarters in Atlanta saying, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Try and, get the connection back up. And it was a panic mode. I feel bad for some of these kids. I call them kids. They're in their 20s, but I feel bad for these guys.
They are,
they're trying to figure it out. Like I do the soccer state championships, for boys and girls, and I'm with this crew all day. I get the same, and they need a break because it's the same camera back, forth, and that's tough to do.
Yeah.
It may not be appetizing entirely for an audience, but to do that for, 12, 14 hours is tough. Soccer this year changes the format. They have 2 games on Thursday, and then they'll have the third place game Friday morning, and then they'll do 4 semis, and then they'll have a couple third place games, and then 3 championships in a row. Your best games are at the end of that long stretch where they're fatigued and tired, and the broadcaster might be as well. You're trying to put on your best show, but it's tough to do. So those are some of the things that play. And I know every athletic director is dealt with this. And the last thing I'll say with this is when you get to the state tournament, no matter what state tournament it is, once you get into the deeper rounds, that's where I show up, so to speak, and you get more crews.
Yep.
Other than that, sometimes it's a mounted camera, and it's something that the schools buy. They pay the subscription, and the AD can flip the camera on at the certain time, flip it off at another time. They can set the time frame. It happens all the time. And I know this from coaching both basketball and football and of having to try and watch film of lower level sports. That's the way I know how that works. So the other thing is that, if you have one of those cameras that those graphics are not working, don't call NFHS. Call the ID or at least email the ID saying, hey, these graphics don't work. I can't follow the clock. Spend the money to do it. I think sometimes it's on the school to say, hey, instead of, you've seen this, zeros on the clock, zeros on the scoreboard.
Yep.
That didn't help me at all, and so I know how frustrated I am as a viewer, and I can guarantee you that, there are hundreds, if not thousands more that are just as frustrated. So I would say reach out to your school, the local school at least, and be kind about it, because they've got a lot of stuff to deal with.
Yeah, no doubt.
But that's where you go, and your athletic secretary is everyone's best friend.
100%.
You want someone who knows everything? That's the woman, or that person is the person to go to every time.
I think one of the things with NFHS that from the beginning I think bothered some people, and it bothered me too, was the cost. That in my feeling when this first came out, if you're going to charge $9-10 a month, and rightly or wrongly, you almost compare that to like subscribing to a movie channel. So if I'm paying that kind of money, which now doesn't seem as much as it did 4 or 5 years ago when you first hit, you expect some kind of quality, and you just weren't getting it at all. But as I mentioned, to be fair,
I think it's the audience. Like in their eyes, the audience is like, hey, look at all this content. We have 10,000 high schools or 100,000 high schools. You can watch anything you want. I don't know anyone that wants to watch that much, even you, when it comes down to recruiting. Like, who watches that much sports? So I understand where that's their selling point. But when it comes to the reality of the viewer, you and I have one school or like 6 schools, or in the state tournament, that casual viewing of, well, what's going on in this game? Well, what's going on in that game? And one thing that I'd like to do, and I mentioned this in the post, is I'd like to do a red zone type semifinal broadcast with Weigel, to just kind of whip around in the studio using those NFHS cameras, but also just to kind of have some context. So it's, it's not play by play, but at least, okay, well, we know what's going on in these games here.
That'd be great.
And, maybe if NFHS wants to get on board and use that as a channel, where you pay the extra $5 for that day, you want $5 for, all access to all 16 semifinal games, let's do it. But there's a plan I have in place. I've submitted to the IHSA for years, and Weigel's sort of, they've been positive in terms of feedback on it. So we'll see.
Great idea. By the way, we've almost doubled our 20 minutes, but that doesn't surprise me at all. I almost call this 20 minutes as a tongue-in-cheek thing, because it always goes over. Question for you with NFHS: how much do you think that's taken away from attendance?
None. I don't think it's taken away from attendance. I really don't.
I'll argue that with you.
You know what? And I'll tell you why I don't think it's the singular factor. No, not at all. I think there's just too much to do. I think that this is a media world that's completely different than when you and I, were growing up, so to speak, where you had linear television and a finite number of channels and a finite number of things to do, or screw around and get in trouble with, so to speak. If you were in your teen years. But I remember going to a Mooseart playoff game when I was a junior in high school, because, well, Mooseart's in the playoffs. I'm a football guy. Let's go see that. It's down the street from me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happens anymore. I just don't think that kids are raised that way. I just think that, when the I got my kids on my tablets right now. And if tablet generation, they're digitally inclined to do those things. And I just don't think that, I just think that there are so many different factors that have changed that. I just think that also class sports has changed it overall. You can look at Indiana. That's the most hard evidence I could tell you that class sports changed attendance from a casual standpoint.
Yeah, no, I get that. But here's a prime example I can give you firsthand that 100% impacted attendance. Mount Carmel St. Rita, that was on live TV. I believe Weigel did that game.
Mm-hmm.
There have been other games before that where I get a phone call from someone at an establishment on Western Avenue saying, "Hey, I see you on TV." Well, what are you talking about? You go up and down every bar in Western Avenue, and they all have the stream on, all of them.
Right.
Mean to tell me those people wouldn't have bundled up and driven over to Gately or driven over to St. Rita?
Well, I mean, when
it wasn't a stream.
I understand what you mean. And so I'll almost frame this argument as, does it change the atmosphere or change attendance? Like, attendance can be one thing. You can sit there and sit with your hands. Right. There's still an atmosphere. It may not have that 6-person deep around the fence type atmosphere, but I don't know if the kids ultimately notice that. And that's really what it comes down to. the kids do love the idea of, wow, our game was on TV. That was cool. Or
Yeah.
that's cool. There is still
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
You know, when you see those cameras show up, there's still something to like, this, we're playing an event. You don't notice the crowd after a while. But the other aspect is, I like to think that it opens the door for people to be interested more so because they're seeing it on TV.
Sure.
Like a guy like Justin Scott, you know, it's like, maybe I'll go watch that kid play, you know, because I saw him on TV, because it's only $5 and they play a road game at a school down the street from me. Like, I don't know, for example, you know, I'm out in Geneva. So like if the Catholic League is going to come out, hey, St. Francis is a good spot for me 10 minutes down the road. If I want to see a recruit, hey, I might pop my head over there. Or Wheaton Academy with Providence coming to town a couple times. So those are things that I think they're, as much as we want to say, it killed attendance, you know, television or streaming killed attendance. What's the trade-off is the exposure that you see, because the newspapers don't exist anymore and you're not getting that sort of traditional linear coverage the way that you used to. And honestly, you know, you see where this goes. So like, it's a rabbit hole that certainly is interesting to explore, but I really do think that, you know, those that really want to be there, and it's up to also schools. And this is, you know, in my day-to-day job as communications director, I spend a lot of time building up the atmosphere, the experience of being in school with sports. We just went through COVID where you couldn't go to anything. Now go to places, go to games, go support your classmates, go see your friends, go cheer them on, go make your student section insanely difficult to play in front of. Like, those are things that I've pushed for in my particular school district. And I would hope that if schools are worried about attendance, they would look inward and say, what are we doing to promote the experience of our event first and foremost?
That's a good point, for sure. Final question. And again, another one we can go down a rabbit hole for a half hour, but 5 years from now, where do you see this going? Where do you see state final broadcasts going? Streaming, where's it going?
Well, I think you'll see it on linear television, but I don't know if it will have the same sway. I think what it comes down to is just the fact that digital has really, you know, it's a different world for all of us. It's very different from what it was, say, 5 years earlier. I mean, you know, the folks at Disney are saying linear television is not our business model. They said it this week. I mean, you got to think, if they're thinking that, then we all need to be thinking that too. Everything's so fragmented now that it's just a different, you know, type of experience than when we would flip on WGN and Jack Brickhouse is doing the state finals for basketball, or, you know, you're seeing the slippery concrete turf at Hancock Stadium for, you know, a Geneva Metamora 1975 state championship game. I look back at those YouTube videos and I go, the quality is sort of is now in some sense. But, you know, the only difference was that, you know, they were able to get on good old channel number 9. That's just not going to happen again. And I think what happens now is that when people start looking towards finding viewers, I think what you're seeing right now with the arms race of the pro and college sports is kind of going to filter down to high school, in a sense of like, all of a sudden the IHSA media rights become valuable. Why? Because you can sell advertisement. Why? Because people will sit and watch, you know, the coveted demographic of male 25 to 54. They might sit and watch that game. You know, I think, you know, ultimately, if you're trying to make a profit, you get off Friday and Saturday. If you're trying to get exposure, one thing I put in the post was the idea of having, you know, classes 1 through 6, Friday, Saturday, 1, 2, 3, Friday, 4, 5, 6, Saturday, or stagger them 1, 3, 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6, which I think would be better, and just a better overall quality product. And then having 7 and 8 on Monday and Tuesday after Thanksgiving weekend, because what's on television or what's on from a competitive standpoint on that Monday, Tuesday? Not a whole lot. College basketball, but people are just like, it's college
too
basketball.
early in the year for that.
It's too early in the year for that. And, you know, you're going to watch your NBA game. You're going to watch you're going to watch the Blackhawks, Connor Bedard. You might flip and array. But, hey, I'll tell you what, you know, and this is where I look at Arlington Heights as a possibility, because the idea of a Loyola Lincoln Way East state championship game on a Tuesday night in Arlington Heights would do a few things. One, it would bring the crowds. You know that, and you would bring the casual crowds because of the extra buildup of hype leading to that. The other aspect is it would bring casual eyeballs that are flipping around their Xfinity stream and went, oh, this is on.
Here's a nice tie into that, which I don't know, again, your age, we're a little bit different in age. Many of us older fans remember and cherish the Wednesday playoff game. Okay.
I love that. I do remember that.
It was unique. And from a TV perspective alone, it was high school special day. No one else had anything going on that day. If you're able to do
and
what
I think ultimately you need to find that. Yeah. I think they got to find that niche again. And I think the IHSA will eventually come around to do that. They got to find that special audience niche. You know, one goofy thing that was in Arizona was that the basketball state championship was on a Monday and a Tuesday in February. And I thought that was odd. And then I look at the crowds and they're good. I'm like, why? Because, well, they have it in Phoenix or the Phoenix metro area, and that's where everyone lives. So it's an easy drive to, go to it, and then turn around and go home. But I think ultimately that Wednesday playoff game, hey, I remember sitting in my third grade classroom listening to a Geneva Marmion game on good old WFXW, AM 1480, serving the Tri-Cities, Geneva, Batavia, St. Charles. I remember sitting in the classroom for a 1 o'clock game, listening to that and thinking, this is awesome. Now, finding that spotlight type window, I think that Monday, Tuesday state championship aspect might be it. The other element is 8-man football. And will that adjust the 8 classes? Will there be an expansion of classes? Will there be a contrition where it's like 7 classes plus 8-man football? Don't even start me on a private only class. That ain't happening.
I know.
But I just think that's kind of where they have to. There's a lot of little things you gotta have to weigh here, but giving everyone the exposure and that state championship experience, or at least that coverage, that would be wonderful. Last thing on this, there's too much getting off Fridays when it comes to quarterfinal, semifinal. Someone's got to go back to Friday, and then play that game. If you're saying no one pays attention, attendance is down, then find your own window, and Friday's sitting there vacant for everyone when it comes to the second round, quarterfinals, and the semifinals. If you want that, when they had Rochester SHG last year on that Friday game, I was like, brilliant. That's great. That should be a statewide game.
I was there.
It wasn't. Yeah, but that's something should be, at least let me watch it from here. Those are the things, and obviously it was on streaming, but that's a perfect traditional television showcase type game. Comcast Sportsnet did a nice job of picking a game, every round, and we would try and do that in a certain way where it was like not up against the other games, so to speak. But I've also seen Geneva, Crystal Lake South, 2008. They moved themselves back to Friday because CN100 was like, "Hey, can we do game of the week? We'll do it live." Sure, you want to do it live? Okay, because we don't know if we can fit everybody here. So they were thrilled to do that. So I think once everyone starts to figure out where their own windows are, and the other aspect is the first game of the season, officials. How many officials do we have? We're losing officials. It doesn't mean you have to play that first Friday on that Friday. You can play on Thursday. You can also play on Wednesday, because we don't have doubles anymore. So I think those are types of, you're starting to see that a little bit kind of work its way back a little bit and stretch out that first week. That helps high school football overall.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I thought I'd mention, and I said this to Matt Troha a couple of years ago, I think eventually you'll see IHSA TV wind up being all online, all stream.
Yeah.
I just, the way things have gone and everyone's kind of doing their own niche, I think when it comes down from a cost standpoint and just an availability standpoint, because with TV, you don't know what's going to happen a week from now. You've seen so many people laid off, fired, closed, stations closed, people closed. You don't know. I mean, I hope Weigel does a game for 40 more years. I hope there's always that outlet. But Matt, it seems like they're dwindling more and more. You mentioned CN100. That was a huge blow, and I knew that was coming.
That hurt me directly. That's
you knew it was coming. I knew it was coming, and you knew what the impact was going to be, and so did I. I think
it just took so long post-pandemic for them to make that decision, and it really hurt because I was sitting there.
It took fans a year to realize not having it, what that meant, and the cost of losing that was huge. I hope I'm wrong.
Yep. We'll see. I mean,
along.
there's still some great local access work being done
Oh
around
yeah,
the state. I mean,
100%.
what was brought up in the thread is BATV has a lot of those game of the week guys from CN100, and
Yeah.
they have steadily been a tradition in this area for 40 years now. And Batavia football has not always been good in that stretch. They certainly have been in the last 20. And that's one of those things where that's helped their product. They've had full stands. They've had people watch their replays, and they, when they come on at, 11 o'clock on the local channel, and, they do themselves a good job with that sort of thing. Not every town has that infrastructure anymore.
No.
But, if you see a game, I'll just say, flip it on, give them that ratings point for a little bit, just so they can see it.
All right, my man. Appreciate it as always. We're under 40 days to kick off, so I'm sure I'll see you sooner rather than later, and try to enjoy the rest of your summer.
You got it. Same to you, my friend. Take care.